I would now like to call up the student equity advocate, Mr. Joseph Graham. As he's coming forward, I would like to just give some context. He began this work in April of 2018, and under my charge, I asked him to learn the context of the district and build relationships. The tenor of this presentation is to really give you some context to the work that he's been doing. I've asked him to be extremely transparent from the student's perspective, because he's a student equity advocate, how students are experiencing our district and how they are experiencing interactions with various stakeholders within the district. And from his work, he will help to inform us at the district level on systems and structures we need to institute to ensure that each of our students have full and equitable access to our programming. So at this time, I present to some and introduce to others Mr. Joseph Graham.
Good evening. Greetings to the board president, Herzog, to Superintendent Johnson, to the Board of Education, to Business Administrator DeAndrea. I'm excited about this work. I'm passionate about this work. And tonight I just wanted to kind of share in my world. Whenever I am introduced to someone in the district and I say I'm the student equity advocate, everyone's response is, that sounds really important. What do you do? And so I'm excited to share that with you this evening. My presentation goals for tonight is to explain the work of the student equity advocate, to describe the caseload and supports offered to date, and to outline upcoming equity initiatives. And so regarding my work, my duties and responsibilities include collecting student data, investigating student and parent issues, communicating with students, families, and schools, assisting with evaluating student progress, identifying additional gap closing services and programming in the district that can help achieve some of the goals the district has already established. Especially conducting ongoing community conversations are extremely important. Communicating, I've talked with numerous organizations and groups throughout the district that have helped out with this work. The National Independent Black Parents Association has done a great deal with supporting the efforts that have been helping out students, supporting professional development, and participating in stakeholder conferences. And what that basically means is that anyone that is involved with advancing student outcomes and doing whatever is necessary to prevent our students in this district, it is imperative that I participate and connect with them. And so the bulk of my work is receiving caseloads. And so what you're looking at here, to reiterate the point that Superintendent Johnson was saying, is that a great deal of my work is listening to the students' voices, and my caseload is based upon the things that they brought to my attention. This is their language, them communicating to me their situations. And so I'm going to break down each of the categories and also kind of give some subtext to what is included in each category. The first one is called teacher harassment intimidation. And so there are students that have brought to my attention that they feel as though they have experienced teachers saying derogatory statements to them in their school experience. At times, staff members instigating conflict with the students so that they can then penalize them by initiating a response that would get them in trouble, to call security, and somehow it ending up in some type of punishment. Students have shared that there's times when administrators or teachers have spoken to them in ways that communicate that they don't believe that they're going to succeed, that they are going to fail. And students have shared with me the impact of some of those conversations or experiences that they've had. The next category is called academic systematic sabotage. And these are students expressing to me the feeling that some of them are already set up to fail. And to give context, some of them complain that they feel as though when they go to certain courses or classes, the lack of lesson plans are there, the lesson plans are not there, and they feel like the teacher is not challenging them, nor believes in or has the responsibility to, push them forward to give them a quality education. And you have students who believe that in many ways they're just being pushed along, and that some teachers just have low expectations of them. Some students have also expressed that when it comes to being placed in math labs or lit labs, that some of the ways that things are constructed, that they're still being put in a certain track that will keep them from being able to advance academically, to grow and maybe move to another level. They sometimes, they share with me, they feel stuck. Another concern is the students express that they feel like, especially black boys that I've spoken to, feel as though they're already classified before they even get evaluated. They feel as though they're all destined to be seen as students that have problems and cannot succeed like others. The next category is student crisis. There are students that reach out to me that are battling with drug addiction, alcohol addiction, gaming addiction, having anger management issues, severe depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. And so there's been a number of various different things that students have reached out to me, and those trying to help students have reached out to me to assist them with. The next category, and I want to reiterate again, that these are students sharing their reality, sharing with me the experience that they're having, and I'm now bringing that to you. The next is matriculation and graduation. In this category, these are students who feel stuck and have been repeating grades. We have some students that are repeating grades for the second and third time, and they feel like they're trapped and trying to find a way to matriculate to the next grade. And so, and a great deal of this work requires partnering with teachers, with guidance counselors, with principals, various different aspects of those who work in the district to help students move along. The part that says graduation, there are students that were, because I came in at the end of last school year, and there were students that were lacking credits and various different things they need in order to finish. And through the efforts of partnering with Superintendent Johnson, administrators and teachers, were able to help them get what they need passed to get the work that they needed to complete so that they could successfully graduate. This next category is called sexual harassment. Again, these are students coming to me, and I want to also remind you all, if you don't know, that I am a confidential. So there are times when students come and it's anonymous, there's private conversation, there's a level of trust that I have to establish with these students because they're expressing very sensitive information. And students have come and have expressed to me that they have felt as though they've experienced staff saying sexually inappropriate things to them, and that they feel as though they cannot tell or share what their negative experience has been because there will be backlash. Some of them feel as though they've been targeted, and not only by experiencing sexual harassment from staff, but even some feel as though certain students, because of certain relationships or networks or groups or peoples that they are friends with, they can do things and get away with them. And so we have a population of young people who are expressing to me that they are being sexually harassed, but do not feel like if they identify who it is, that anything will be done, and they fear that they will suffer for it. I want to go back up to racial discrimination. And if you'll notice, many of these things overlap. But racial discrimination, this category, and again, I'm sharing with you things that students have shared with me, is when when the student experiences somebody speaking a racial slur or saying something racially derogatory directly to them. For example, some have expressed that they've experienced segregation in the classroom, where based upon race, they've been separated and put into different groups and not allowed to sit or partake in the lesson of that day with certain groups. Some have expressed that even with going over certain literature for the lesson, that there's racial slurs being used outside of context, not being, it's not being communicated effectively why the terms are being used and expressed. And even after students have expressed being uncomfortable, that they have been ignored and still forced to endure hearing language that is affecting them. The other thing is with racial discrimination is many of them, and I was kind of reiterating this earlier, where feel like, for example, that a lot of black young ladies have confessed that they feel as though they're targeted when it comes to the attire, the dress code, and that because they're built a certain way, they are often picked on and spoken to and targeted, whereas non-students of color are not targeted. Moving forward, the next category is HIB denials. And so students have expressed that they have been harassed, been bullied, have battled with some intimidation, and when they express this reality to administrators, that they are told, well, that's not really a bullying issue, or it's not really a concern. Some of the students expressed that they feel as though as a black child, that the administrators never look at them as victims. That somehow, if it's a non-student of color expressing harassment or bullying, then it's taken as somebody must be doing something to them. But when a student of color expresses it, it's almost as if, from the student's perspective, it's almost as if it's unfathomable that they are a victim. Like they assume that it must be their fault, they've done something wrong. My next category is child neglect and abuse. This has also been an area that I've definitely had to partner with some real stars in the district that care about our children, where students have come and expressed inappropriate things happening at home. Sometimes we see scars, or we just notice things that are not right and out of place, and this has made up some of the cases that I've had to respond to and partner with a great many people in the district to help, solve these issues. The next is school and community resources. And I'm going to get into this a little bit more later, but what I'm excited about with this is we have parents or students themselves express that they need help with before school or after school care. I've had students come to me and they've expressed that they're tired of flunking classes. They're tired of being held back and need some type of tutoring. I've had students express that, especially a great deal of 10th graders have said, in my 9th grade year I messed up, but I want to get right. I need a mentor. I need someone to talk to. And it's in those times that I'm able to connect them with some community resources. But those community resources stretch from everything to, children that need glasses, students that are dealing in heavy poverty situations, students that are battling with homelessness. And so it becomes imperative for a student equity advocate to establish the partnerships throughout the district to help meet these needs that students are bringing to our attention. The last category is religious discrimination. Students have expressed that due to their beliefs, they've been ostracized. Some have actually flunked courses in the district because of certain things that their religious stance would not let them partake in, and instead of it being accommodated, they were receiving failing grades. But due to some superstars in the district, we're working for that never to happen again. We also have sometimes because we live in an atmosphere where there's certain holidays that are popular, and it imposes sometimes beliefs upon a student population that doesn't go along with what has been seen as traditional ideas or traditional celebrations, and there's not been alternatives or sometimes explanations. Some of the literature that we teach from have concepts that are diametrically opposed to some of the religious and spiritual beliefs of parents in the district, and feeling as though they have nowhere to turn. And so this, again, is a summary of my caseload, and I've broken down the different areas that it involves. So now this pie chart shows what is the percentage of these various different cases. And so the biggest chunk out of all of the categories that I've just gone over is racial discrimination at 20.4%. And let me just say this, I don't believe I established this in the beginning, is my caseload involves 150 cases, and though that may seem like a lot, I believe I haven't even scratched the surface, and there's a great deal of those in the district that are yet to benefit from the position of a student equity advocate. The next biggest category is matriculation and graduation, helping out in terms of my caseload, dealing with students who are saying, we want to graduate, we want to do better. Next would be academic and systematic sabotage, children expressing feeling as though there's forces fighting against their academic success. Student crisis would be the next category, the large category. And after that, we have school community resources and teacher harassment and intimidation, having the same amount, 8.8%. Sexual harassment at 5.4%, HIV denials at 3.4%, child neglect at 1.4%, and religious discrimination at 0.7%. I want to reiterate, this is just amongst the caseload that I have had thus far since coming in April. So amongst my caseload, I wanted to look at what is the caseload by gender. And as you can see, it's almost half and half. 46.9% of my cases involve female students in the district, and 53.1% involve male students in the district. Amongst race, the biggest race in my caseload are my African American student population at 85%. Next would be our white student population at 8.2%, Hispanic at 4.8%, and Asian at 2.0%. Again, this is amongst the caseload that I've been working since April. Now, this is caseload by school. And so the biggest chunk is Montclair High School. Comically, I've been asked by many employees at the high school where my office is at the high school, because I've been there so much. And I say, I do not have an office here. Are you sure? No, I do not. But the high school has taken up 70.7% of the caseload that I've worked. Next would be Buzz Aldrin at 8.8%, Renaissance at 6.1%, Glenfield and Hillside at 3.4%, Edgemont and Nishawayne at 2.7%, and Bradford and Northeast at 0.7%, as well as Watchung Elementary at 0.7%. And again, this is amongst the caseload that I have now. And so with all of these concerns that I've expressed, it's about solutions. It's about a plan. And so these are the equity initiatives that have been put in place and unfolding. The first one is the early intervention report. Due to the guidance of Superintendent Johnson, this is designed for us to identify our students that have intense support needs, so that we can step in and give them the support they need before things get to a critical stage. The school action team partnerships, this is important because it gives the student equity advocate an opportunity to, connect arms with each of the schools, looking at their goals and work together to achieving those goals. One of the things that has me excited about when I first came to the Montclair Public School District is this anti-racism policy that was put in place and established before I came through the grassroots efforts in the city and courageous district leaders. And with that policy being in place, I've been charged with assisting and adding regulations to this anti-racism policy. Also, decreasing grade repetition, and I've kind of spoken about that throughout some of the other things that I've expressed, is really getting our children to move on, because when they stay back, once you stay back twice, it's heart-wrenching to listen to the students express it's hard to remain for all kinds of reasons. Next is increased students of color graduation outcomes. And so obviously partnering with so many different groups in the school system to help our students of color to successfully graduate and to not just get them across the stage, but to help establish a future post-high school. Next is district community partnership accountability. We have partnerships already in the district where community organizations that serve the populations of our students, whether we're talking about organizations that help out with academic concerns, organizations that have mentorship components. These we have, as I expressed in the breakdown of my categories, these services are needed. And so this component and this initiative is about maximizing the efforts of what's already been put in place, and so that we can make sure that students are actually benefiting from things the district has already established. And last will be student equity advocate partnerships. And basically what this is you cannot do student equity advocate work without you partnering with anyone and everyone that comes in contact with students who wants to improve upon their student experience in the Montclair Public School System. And so literally I've partnered with child study team, security guards, nurses, principals, teachers, paras, janitors, everyone who can add just another piece of the puzzle to assure that our students are getting the opportunities to succeed necessary. That concludes my presentation, and I open the floor for any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board? I think Latifah raised her hand first, then Priscilla.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I was very glad to see what you're doing and hear about what you're doing. I have a couple of questions. What is the referral process for students to see you? Excellent question.
How students come to me has been a variety of ways. There are students who've looked me up on the Montclair website and found my information. There are students who have, after getting a business card of mine from maybe a staff member, has called me up, sent me an email. So it's various different ways. Sometimes one student will tell another student. So it's a variety of ways. Sometimes they straight call me up, or if they see me, they'll walk up to me. This is not a shy district when it comes to our student population.
Also, you were talking about your meetings or your involvement with community organizations. How often are you able to meet with the organizations, or how many have you met with since you've been here?
That's a good question. Yesterday, I was a part of a meeting with Superintendent Johnson, speaking with organizations at least 4 organizations that were in the room that have been working with the district, whether we're talking about Imani, Sister for Sister, Brother to Brother, MNDC, and what we're doing is trying to firmly, because some of them have intersected with one another, but creating a systematic way of us working together. I've gone to meetings with different community organizations. How many? I tell you, I've spent some evenings and Saturdays, and I've never been asked to come and not come.
When you were talking about particularly the categories, and many of those categories deal with student trauma, what is the response of your office to when those students self-identify in those situations?
Well, you can imagine each category has a different demand. Some have the same, and it involves investigating, occurrences. It involves meeting with staff members. Based upon which particular category you're talking about, it involves me communicating with parents. And so everything from verifying what's being communicated to me, having an investigation, gathering data regarding, and I'm going to tell you, there's been many times where in the process of investigating a matter, another matter is awakened. And that's where these intersections take place. But investigating the matter is the first step. And how it begins a lot of times with whatever the particular category or issue is. Yes.
Thank you. My first question was about how the students contact you. The other question I had, when you're working with a student, do you make contact with the parent and brainstorm ideas with them or talk about what the issues are? Or
Yes.
do you keep this totally confidential and only deal with the student?
No, I communicate with the parents. The only time, I've not been in a situation where a student did not want me to communicate with the parent unless we're dealing with child neglect and abuse. Other than that, more times often than not, parents have been excited to partner. First of all, some of them have been excited at the fact that the student showed the initiative to get some things done. And so more times often than not, the parents have been compliant.
Do you find there's a lot of community resources to help you when you reach out to the community?
I find that there's a lot of community resources, but it's fragmented. And this could be, I'm only speaking from my experience, that it's like it's out there, but for whatever reason, sometimes the populations that need it are unaware of them. They're unaware of how they intersect. And so that's something I'm trying to work with other individuals to connect those dots. But what I find is there are resources out there. Do I have ideas on increasing some of those resources? Absolutely. Am I mad that I missed some emails about funding possibilities? Yes, I am. So there are some resources out there that have been, I don't think have been maximized. And I think when they do, support will probably have to increase.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mr. Graham, thank you very much for the presentation. Very insightful. Going back to the caseload categories, when you were talking about student crisis,
Yes.
you made reference to gaming addiction.
Yes.
Have you received a lot of such complaints, for lack of a better word?
I have. Because it's a new phenomenon in some areas. There's some, in some arenas, and because it's been often dismissed as a real issue, but I have witnessed on firsthand it is a real issue. And so, though it may be small in number, but it is growing because it oftentimes has been communicated as though it's something else. And I think it has taken a while for even parents to realize, oh, that's what it is, because it's been so outside of the norm when we think of addiction, but it's growing.
I have no doubt, and I think it's a very serious issue.
Yes.
Is there a way for you to quantify African American, Caucasian, Hispanic, Asian in terms of complaints or I don't know if complaint's the right word, but as it relates to gaming
Yes.
addiction?
Right now, the cases that I've had deal more with students of color that have actually reached out for help. Now, if I just talk about the word on the street, in terms of what I hear with young people, that is out there, but that is the only population that have reached out to me one way or another looking for help. And as I've said, in terms of the cases I've had so far, I don't even believe I've scratched the surface. And so it's things like what you just said, I know are out there. I just haven't connected, but it's been something that has been talked about amongst students.
All right, keep scratching the surface on that one. Then a very quick follow-up, because I'm sure colleagues have some questions. Under school community resources, you had made reference to student homelessness, unless I misheard.
Yeah.
Are we aware of student homelessness and whether that's a growing number? And
Well, I know that Felice has been doing an excellent job at helping out when it comes to what's happening in the areas of homelessness in the district. And what I've been finding is the rise of the cost of living in Montclair, and families joining coming together to kind of find a place to stay, and sometimes in transition, not having a place to stay has been a reality. And of course, with all that involves, they're not always exactly transparent, right? So coming and having a conversation with me, they have a need, but it's scary. What's the consequences of that? So it becomes a real dicey area that I'm still working through.
at the risk of being accused of giving you an order, please report back to us on that at some point, because that's something, it's unacceptable.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Where are you housed physically? Where's your office?
All right. I have a space at central office,
Okay.
but my main office is at Nishawayne Elementary.
Okay, so that you're not wandering the halls for kids. If a high school student wanted to find you, they have to pick up the phone, or a middle school student, or...
Yes.
Are you in the buildings during the week?
Yes.
So that's another way that when they see you, as you said, when they see you, they can catch you. How do you deal with issues where you're required, for example, where you're required to report, even if a student may not want to? For example, you gave the sexual harassment example. So you now become aware of a situation, you're required to report it, the student doesn't want you to. How do you handle those situations?
When students, let me tell you, students are, they know what to say and what not to say and how far to communicate. And so in some instances, they may make me aware of some things, but names may not be established. And you can imagine, if they are, then verification. And so that becomes an area that presents its own set of challenges. But be clear, one thing I can tell you is that I'm committed to being a student equity advocate, and whatever is needed to make sure that student is safe, I pursue.
Thank you.
Hi. Thanks very much for your presentation.
Yes.
I want to go back to the referral question, because that was my question as well. But so I just want to know how you were introduced to the schools, and if it was a formal introduction, or how students knew that you were there and available. And is there some other way we could do that would make you have even broader recognition? Yes. I guess is what I'm asking. I was curious about how the referrals came to you, but I think, first of all, how did anyone know? I mean, we announced it here, but I don't think that's,
Absolutely.
a great announcement.
That's a great question. One thing that I did, there's a combination of ways, right? When the back-to-school nights, I tried to attend as many of them as I could make. And when one thing that I got a running joke going on with Roxy is I need you to print me more cards. Because unlike I hand out more cards than I think anyone who might have been in the district because of the nature of the work. And so when I've gone out to these back to school nights, I've passed out information and literally just start conversation, communicating, and other events that schools might have. I'll go and support. And there's been a few events where they've announced, like when we did the high school fall night event, that I was introduced openly at that event. And there's teachers that have told students about me and are beginning to invite me to classroom events to speak on various different topics and things. I love social studies. I'm a history person. I taught language arts. And so different things invited me to different events, even some health classes regarding sexual harassment, things. They want to invite me to come in and have conversations. So that's a growing phenomenon. But in terms of other ways, me and Superintendent Johnson have discussed ways of doing that.
Thank you so much for your report.
Yeah.
I find it really thought-provoking, and we have a lot of work ahead of us. One thing that surprised me on here was the HIB denials. And the reason it surprised me was there's a formal process around HIBs where HIBs have to be investigated. Are we saying that if kids are reporting HIBs, they're not being recorded and investigated?
Yes.
Or are we saying they're being investigated? Okay.
I'm saying...
Well, that seems to me like low-hanging fruit, right?
Yes.
As soon as there's any documentation of that, that seems fairly straightforward to address, right?
Yes.
Are there other areas where you see just some... Can I call that an easy fix, right? Are there other areas where you think, that's a huge impact on a student, right?
Yes.
To have to be harassed or bullied and someone's not taking that seriously enough to investigate with what seems like a fairly straightforward fix. Are there other areas where you think there are things that can be done? Some of these are very deeply entrenched. I understand that. And some...
There's 1,000 things that come to my mind, but one in the area of academic and systematic sabotage. At the high school, if a student is an academic student, they don't have the option to take anything other than Spanish. And there's been students who would like to take another world language subject, but somehow it is understood that Spanish is, at the level that academic is, and that students at that level are not allowed to take anything else. And so that is an area that comes to mind. There's lots of areas that come to mind, but that would be one.
So, turn off your mic for one moment. So, there are several instances that Mr. Graham just named that we are fixing immediately. And one of the things that this position has allowed us to do was understand some of these practices that are not often talked about that can be easily corrected. So some of the opportunities at the high school that are offered to some and not all are things that are within our control that we can address immediately. So there's several pieces with that we are immediately addressing just to make sure that there's clarity around access and opportunity at the high school.
Since this is a high-level presentation, maybe you could provide the board with some more details at another time or in a more appropriate forum.
Absolutely. We can tell you, I can provide the hard data that lives behind some of these big picture items to give you more clarity. But this work that Mr. Graham is doing is so powerful because it's opening up an opportunity for us to self-correct because it's the right thing to do with very easy system shifts.
I think what the request is to know if we could get those system shifts. Absolutely. If we could find out what those things that you were able to kind of go, oh, we didn't know we were doing this, now we'll stop.
Thank you for asking, Ann.
So just had, just a follow-up to Jessica's question, the sexual harassment question that Jessica had, could you give just a little more insight on how you deal with that? Because there's a power dynamic, there's a he said, she said dynamic, and then there's a kid being in a, like, if someone comes to you with a sexual harassment complaint today, are they going back into that classroom tomorrow?
Yes. And many times they're not expressing to me where that classroom is, in some cases.
And are you seeing multiple complaints that direct you in one way or another to a particular classroom?
I can say that I'm given direction from multiple complaints that send me someplace. So, through listening, and you allowing yourself to be an ear to those in need, over time, what needs to be addressed unfolds.
Okay. There's a lot in here. I really appreciate you bringing this to us, and I know you've only started this work, but I just appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
I just have one more coming off of Mrs. Murren's questions. Is there a time when you're dealing with children that you go into the building administration and bring them into the case so that you could get the benefit of their expertise at their level of authority? Or
say that again?
Is there a time when you're dealing with a student with some of these issues like sexual harassment or even an abandonment issue that you go to the building administration so that you can tap into their resources at that level, inform them of something like this, or is what you do strictly confidential between you and the student and possibly the parents?
In my experience, one thing is my partnership with the administration is when something is happening in their building, I will communicate with them. And so that the resources in that building that student needs can get to them.
No, I think that's a good point to bring out, because in talking about HIB and things like that, I would think that some of these conversations may enter into that arena at some point.
Absolutely.
Even just to fact find, did you know about this? Was anything done before?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much.
What's the relationship you have in terms of the buildings, talking about building administrators, with the SACs in the building? Because it does seem like a lot of these things that obviously that you're addressing would also be addressed by the SAC. So how do you all?
I've worked with a few of them. There's times when, they may have some idea. There's times when they may not be aware, based upon whether or not the student has communicated to them. But just about everyone coming in contact with the students, especially those designated for either academic or emotional concerns, I have a relationship with them, and we've worked as a team to help students.
So I just had one other question about how you capture your data and then how you report it around your caseload. So I see your categories, which are really helpful. But is there data that you're reporting into the superintendent on a regular basis to begin to like shape how you approach the work going forward?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. One of the things I'm passionate about is memorializing this position. So regardless of who has it, it can be done and duplicated. And so, so to answer your question, yes, as things unfold and as I'm engaging, dealing with various different situations, when there's a system that works, there's a process, a method that works, then I begin to create it, log the system of how, when there's other people who are in this position, what they need to do. And that's a weekly process.
All right, Mr. Graham, thank you for an excellent presentation. Thank you. We look forward to hearing more.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good evening. My comments tonight are in response to the district's student equity advocate, Mr. Joseph Graham's allegations made public during his presentation to this board on November 7th, 2018. So I'm glad you said he will be here in December. I wanted to go on record as stating that prior to his introduction at the November 14th, 2018 MEA Rep Council meeting, Mr. Graham has never communicated with me via email or in person. This means that as the president of the MEA, I was never made aware of any of the allegations of sexual harassment, religious and racial discrimination, as well as bullying that Mr. Graham made on that night. I also want to make it abundantly clear that in no way, shape, or form is the MEA attempting to dispute the truths of our students, no matter how horrific they were presented to be. To be the contrary, tonight the concern of the association is that those students get resolution and restoration. Our concerns are solely based upon substantiation, accountability, and reporting. So I'm going to trust that I'm correct in my assumption that all allegations were substantiated by the superintendent and the board prior to Mr. Graham presenting them publicly. And you are currently in possession of the documentation that would confirm 150 allegations, since he's already presented them. So I don't think there's much need for me to spend time on substantiation, so I'm going to jump right to accountability. Mr. Graham indicated that, 1, students were not allowed to partake in lessons based upon their race, racial discrimination. Students failed classes due to their religion, religious discrimination. Students have been sexually harassed by staff. Students have been bullied by staff. All of these are criminal. Any accusations of criminal activity must be communicated to the MEA president so representation can be provided when the district conducts its mandatory investigation. Although Mr. Graham said these accusations were made against teachers, none of them were communicated to the MEA leadership by Mr. Graham nor the superintendent, leaving me to assume that there was no investigation at all, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because without an investigation, there's no accounting for the teacher and no resolution for the student. All parties lose when there's no accountability. Therefore, we as a district end up causing even further harm to the student. Finally, I want to focus on reporting. Again, I will trust that you've documented that in all of your cases you have contacted the parent when a minor child has reported these instances of racial discrimination, religious discrimination, and sexual harassment, therefore allowing the parent or guardian to seek legal recourse for their child, again, as these things are all criminal offenses. Mr. Graham stated that, quote, "These are students coming to me, and I want to also remind you all, if you don't know, that I am a confidential." Now, I have to be honest, I'm not aware of what a confidential is, but I do know is that employees of a school district are mandated reporters of any information given by a child.
Thank you, President Robertson. Ms. Albert, and then Vice President Manos.
Right. Hi, I'm Beth Albert, and I am the Communications Chair of the MEA and the School Secretary at Bullock, and also I live in Montclair, and my kids graduated the high school. I would like to pick up where President Robertson left off. Again, employees of a school district are mandated reporters of any information given by a child whenever there is a reasonable suspicion of abuse. Mr. Graham's presentation certainly qualifies as such. New Jersey statutes Title IX, Children, Juvenile, and Domestic Relations states the law on mandatory reporting as follows. Any person knowingly violating the provisions of this act, including the failure to report an act of child abuse, having reasonable cause to believe that an act of child abuse has been committed, is a disorderly person. What New Jersey state certifications does the SEA hold, and do any of them exempt him from being a mandated reporter? Finally, if we are sending students back to hallways, classrooms, and households in which they are being harassed, discriminated, and abused without the follow-throughs just described, then we are not helping these children at all. We are not being advocates. We are simply recorders. We are breaking the law. The MEA asks that district response be in the form of documentation that reflects the services provided to the 150 cases that Mr. Graham cited. We feel, as the MEA, this is very serious. We care about the students first, so we'd like to know what the plan is. And this is breaking the segue to Mr. Manos, but I just want to use this time also as an MEA representative and a member of the Montclair School District to publicly thank my colleagues for all that they did on the day and night of the snowstorm. Communication that first came through to families failed to mention the staff that stayed. Administrators dutifully were mentioned as staying with the students, but families and guardians need to know that staff of all kinds stayed as well, not to get accolades, not to be treated any differently, but it's what's been done every single day. The staff does this every single day, and because there was a snowstorm, there was no different. I'm lucky because I live down the street from the school where I work. I get to ride my bike to school. I'm very, very lucky to live in the area. But many staff, I know, you laugh at me, many staff do not have that privilege, and they stayed anyway. One of my colleagues got home at 4 a.m. And also, just to let you know, the dedication, my phone didn't pop up with the fact that school was closed till about 8:20, and I was already on my way to school. Some staff members were already in the schools or making that long journey as well. So I just wanted to publicly thank all of them.
Thank you. Vice President Manos, then Karen Trapuka.
Good evening. Hi. How are you? I, too, have some questions regarding the Student Equity Advocates presentation from November 7th. I understand the necessity of confidentiality. However, the Board of Education can report how many HIB and DCP&P investigations the district currently has open that were brought about through Mr. Graham's investigations between April and November of this year. I'd like to know when that report would be made available. The School Equity Advocate presentation also indicated that data is collected on a weekly basis. When will those 150 cases with all personal information redacted be made available? For the security and accountability of Mr. Graham, how and where were the meetings with students conducted? And specifically, what community organizations has Mr. Graham worked with directly? Dr. Johnson, you stated in your introduction of the School Equity Advocate that he will help to inform us that at the district level on systems and structures we need to institute to ensure that each of our students have full and equitable access to our programming. I'm sure he has provided that information to the board, but the public would like to know that as well. When will that be made available? One of the positives of the School Equity Advocate position when it was created is that the person would not belong to either the MEA or the MPA and would present unbiased investigations of central office and the Board of Education. The presentation on November 7th only addressed the teachers and the principals. I'm assuming Mr. Graham's reports now and in the future will inform as to how institutional racism, the lack of representation, in particular the lack of hiring teachers of color, as well as how the cutting of staff and programming also affect matriculation. We would assume the information requested tonight should already be available, as Mr. Graham's presentation in November must have been based on the evidence that we're requesting. So we request that the board provide that information prior to Mr. Graham's next presentation in December so that the public can be better informed. The MEA and I specifically want our district and Montclair High School, a building that I've taught in and called home for 20 years, and where a majority of the issues are said to reside, to be a safe learning environment for all students. This needs to be addressed. There needs to be accountability, and we look forward to your responses. Thank you.